Hey, good morning, everybody. For those folks coming in late, there's plenty of seats up front, just like kind of being the last to arrive for church. You get the front pews. We got a great panel discussion this morning. My name's Keith Halgard. I'm the director for the state of California for CA Technologies, and we're going to have a discussion about Agile transformation today. And to do that, let me get this panel introduced. So first of all, we have with us Tom Perry. Tom Perry is a senior principal transformation consultant at CA Technologies. Mr. Perry has 18 years of Agile team leadership, coaching, and mentoring experience. Mr. Perry has deep experience in driving successful large-scale transformations for organizations through Agile planning, expert training, and facilitation. Mr. Perry is adept at building trust and confidence with stakeholders. Mr. Perry is a national and international speaker on the topics of Agile and Lean. And Mr. Perry is also the author of the book, The Little Book of Impediments. Prior to joining CA Technology, Mr. Perry held senior positions at organizations such as Visa, CyberSource, and Solutions IQ. Mr. Perry is co-chairman of the Agile Open Northwest, and Mr. Perry is also a sailor, dad, and husband. I'm not sure what order that is. Also joining us today,
that's right,
we have Alisha Griffin. Ms. Griffin is the director of the California Department of Child Support Services. Ms. Griffin has over 17 years of child support experience and also has a background in child welfare, child protection, rehabilitation, and therapeutic services. Prior to coming to California, Ms. Griffin led the child support program in the state of New Jersey. While there, Ms. Griffin led the design, procurement, implementation, and management of the first second-generation national model child support automated system. It's considered one of the most successful re-engineering of a new system in the health and human services domain. Ms. Griffin has served as past president of the National Child Support Enforcement Association and National Council of Child Support Directors. Ms. Griffin currently serves on the Executive Council of NCCSD and serves on NCSEA's International and Policy and Government Relations Committees. Ms. Griffin also served as the president and senior advisor for National Family Preservation Network. Ms. Griffin has a master's in both clinical and community psychology. And Sumi Smith. Ms. Smith has over 25 years of executive and management experience, including strategy development, IT operations, organizational development and planning, IT portfolio management, budget analysis and development, and contract management. Ms. Smith has led program initiatives in excess of $400 million and has established and managed organizations in excess of 600 staff. Ms. Smith is currently the Assistant CIO for the Department of Child Support Services. Ms. Smith assists in the formulation, implementation, and administration of statewide IT policies relating to child support services, programs, and systems, including the Child Support Enforcement System. Prior to the Department of Child Support Services, Ms. Smith was at the Department of Transportation, Caltrans. While at Caltrans, Ms. Smith served as division chief as well as acting CIO. Ms. Smith holds a Bachelor of Science in Engineering from Cal Poly and is a certified PMP. Ms. Smith is a speaker and author for organizations such as Women in Technology International, the Project Management Institute, and the CIO Academy. So that's our panel. I'm going to kick it off for Tom.
Thank you. So, when I first started doing Agile projects back in 1998, it was a huge accomplishment just to get a team transformed, if you will, to doing Agile. Just getting a team up and doing Scrum was a really big deal. And to be honest with you, we didn't even use the term transformation. There was no such thing as a transformation. It was just, we're going to take this team and we're going to move them from waterfall to Scrum, and that was as far as the conversation got at the time. It wasn't until a few years later later, around 2005, that I worked on my first state government project for the state of Washington. And that was also a good example of a project where we were starting to struggle with working with multiple teams. So we were entering a world where it was no longer sufficient for us to simply get one team working efficiently together. We now had to get multiple teams working together. So it was a whole new challenge. And so the Administrative Office of the Courts up in Washington had elected to take on an Agile transformation of sorts, and they had hired a bunch of consultants to come in and contractors to develop a big new system for them for their juvenile justice record system. And at the time, you know, on the face of it, it just looked like a big technology project. And the way they talked about it, it was just a big technological challenge. It was going to be an enormous schema to hold all of these records from all over the state. And so we were just going to be building a very complicated, very ambitious system, but there wasn't much conversation about the business. There was no business. It was just technology, okay? And we were going to develop this really challenging system, and that would be good enough. And that's when I first encountered what I think it meant to be dealing with the business in state government, which was I found out that none of the counties that were going to be using this system were aware that it existed. My customers didn't know about it. And so as a humble scrum master on one of the teams, I went to some of the stakeholders and said, hey guys, I think we have a problem. And they said, yeah, we know we need to get the word out. How are we going to do that? And so I stepped forward at the time and said, okay, I think we need to do a road show. And so we went out, and I started driving from county to county to county in Washington State, doing demos, showing them what the technology would do and getting their feedback. And that was my first experience with trying to close the loop between these technology teams and our customers, as well as the business, that is our state stakeholders, trying to keep everyone appraised of what we were doing and starting to incorporate their feedback. And you know what? It was a heck of a lot of fun. I had no idea what I was getting into, which is probably why I enjoyed it so much. As it went along, I learned a lot about the firsthand about the difference in effectiveness between showing somebody PowerPoints, showing somebody live working software, even if it crashes. And so, you know, what I came to understand was that getting technology and business together is incredibly complicated, incredibly subtle stuff. There's a lot of relationship management. There's Agile stuff in there too, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of, you know, good collaboration skills and practices, but a lot of it goes far beyond that. And so I'm really happy to be here with Sumi and Alisha because they've got some incredible experiences that I'm really looking forward to hearing more about. But I'm also especially happy to see, you know, a packed room here of people who've probably had their own experiences. And so I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm going to be roaming around with a microphone, and I'm really curious to hear your contribution to this. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some of the questions up on the screen here. And so if at any point in this conversation you have a thought or an opinion or you know, a question, I'd like you to just raise your hand, let me know, and I'll be roaming around, and I'd like to hear from you guys. In fact, for folks who are brave enough and willing to offer any kind of contribution, we have some gifts here, some books and things, and so hopefully we can reward that bravery. So with that, I wanted to start by sharing just a little bit of my experience, and Sumi and Alisha, anything to add to that?
Not at the moment, I think. Is this working? Yes, you can hear me. Okay. So not really at the moment. You know, I think that you hit on a number of the issues that we want to explore further.
Good, good. So, you know, what I was dealing with, we started off, the pitch as it came across, as it initially comes across, is the technology pitch. Has anyone else sort of been faced with that on these big projects where, you know, the initial sell is, hey, it's all about this cool new technology? Has anyone else encountered that? Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, I see some nodding
Yes.
heads. Okay, good, good. So what were some of the key challenges that you faced in your organization? So I was in kind of a minor role, to be honest with you, on this project. And I found myself in the position of, oh my gosh, we're in trouble. Somebody needs to do something. I actually had people tell me, Tom, you're not supposed to do that. Have you found yourself in a similar position?
Well, yeah, and I would speak both from my experience in New Jersey and also from my more recent experience here in California, because, you know, the key issue is how do you get business and technology? You know, you always hear that little phrase of, you know, business drives technology, but the truth is it's usually easier for technology to do what technology does and business to kind of sit over here. And then we can criticize each other, is my experience. It's like, oh, it's your fault, or it's somebody else's fault, or we're not hearing from the right. What do you mean you wanted that? So, you know, in both projects, you have, as you pointed out in Washington State, the diversity that the business brings to the table. And particularly when you have counties, in my case, counties, courts, you know, advocacy organizations, constituent needs that need to be met in terms of customer service and a variety of other things, making sure and reaching out to those diverse organizations and understanding what their requirements and business needs are is always very challenging. And then getting those two to work together. Coming here, I was somewhat amazed in terms of the schema of the time frame, because we built the New Jersey system in 2003 to 2004. So the system here in California was also built amongst the same time. But when I walked in, I was amazed at the amount of isolation that still existed within the IT and the business shops, and the need to break some of those perceptions down and some of that staleness. And some of that had grown up from lack of leadership and lack of willingness to confront kind of getting everybody to the table, breaking down some of that hierarchical stuff that we get into. Oh, it's got to go up here before it'll come down here, before it can get over there, and really start saying, no, everybody needs to be at the table, and everybody needs to own the change that we need to go through.
That's a really good point. I think one of the things, you know, I was saying that what we think of in terms of Agile has evolved. You know, in the beginning it was just a team, then it became multiple teams, and that question of how we are going to coordinate across those teams has become one that I think we're now starting to address much better than we used to. So there are formalized ways of doing it. Now I teach people to use frameworks like SAFe and LESS and DAD. You may have heard of some of these frameworks, you know, these Agile frameworks. And what they're doing is they're putting some sort of framework in place that says you need to have a person here who's going to coordinate this. And they're going to be, you know, a person responsible for the architecture, and a person responsible for keeping the Scrum Masters sane. And, you know, there's, you know, those sorts of things. And so that coordination, there are a lot of different variations on that, though, right? I mean, and especially, as I suspect you guys have encountered, especially around 2003, 2004, that sort of thing, we were making it up. How did you make it up?
Well, we were making it up. I remember at that time, we were just starting to get into what is Agile, and like you had said before, you know, just taking our teams and saying, by the way, you're going to do Scrum now, bringing in a Scrum trainer, and all of a sudden people are Scrum certified, and then you expect that, you know, now they're going to perform Agile. I was working for a Defense Department contractor at around that time frame, and they had decided that they wanted to bring in Agile, because now they were going to be Agile. And but the issue was that, like all communication, it wasn't spread out. So we only had Agile sponsorship within a small area of the company. And the rest of the company, being a DoD contractor, was very hierarchical, very, much about approvals and process, and you have to write everything down, and the document has to get through 5 or 6 signatures and all the way up. And so it was very, very difficult to implement that. And the only way that, the way that we attempted to do it, that I did it in my team, was to pull together a matrix team. And it had to be matrix because, of course, it took forever to create an organization. So you have to pull together a very temporary, very matrix team, and you had to get the commitment of time that they'd be on that team for a certain, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever your scrum cycles were, and make the goal small enough to achieve. And really, that's the only way we did the communication. So when people walked out, they were either part of product development, or they were part of engineering, or they were part of sales, consulting. And then they walked back to their own groups with that information that they could then disseminate. But you were depending on that person to make that communication.
So you changed the structure.
To a certain extent, for a short amount of time.
Yeah, and I would say we didn't even know we were Scrum or Agile at the time. We put out an RFP to build a new system because the old system was certainly Band-Aid, it was Bull mainframe, it was, just really COBOL programmed and had no, we were needing to go to actually, I think, nursing homes to find people who could, fix it, or certainly the retired collection. But, we started out with a project plan that then got accelerated because my plan had been, and the way we were funding it was on the incentives we earn were at that point of time matchable by federal government. Well, that changed within about a month of awarding the RFP. So we had to take and reconfigure the whole project plan because we needed to get it done in 3 years and on time and under budget. And so we did that. But we reconfigured it as a partnership with all of the entities and really began to look at kind of a modular process of going through that, really creating teams and getting them down to honing that business between both our partner, implementation and development vendor, but also in terms of all of our business partners, so that we brought everybody to the table to really start creating these collectives that really then started to roll things out and get sign-off on everything. So we became real horizontal with everybody sitting at the table and agreeing to that process at the beginning.
Nice, nice. So tell me a little bit more. Who were these business partners that you're talking about? Can you give me a picture of that?
Well, in the case of New Jersey in particular, it was at that time the county welfare agencies, TANF, food stamps, child support units, our courts in terms of probation services and family court intake staff and family court judges, as well as the other child support professional units throughout the state. And the federal government was another player in the midst of all of that.
So we're talking about people like the courts and different divisions and groups, counties. We have a few different examples. What are some other examples of customers when you're in state government or heaven forbid, federal government? What are other examples of customers? Business partners. The public? Very good. Yes, absolutely. And more they're doing all sorts of interesting stuff, aren't they? Yeah. What are some others? Advocacy groups, right? Right? Yes?
Our public affairs media branch is very much involved.
Oh, okay. Public affairs, the public affairs media branch. Others? Unions? Oh my gosh, I completely forgotten about unions. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a big one. That's huge. Yeah. Those are some great examples. So, and I have to admit that coming into this, I was thinking, God, the business, who's the business when you're talking about state government? What is the business? What is that thing? What is that character? And it is. It's the counties, it's the courts, it's the different services, it's the unions, it's those people. They are the business. And, you know, some of your stakeholders and that sort of thing. You think I'm characterizing that well?
Sure. I think the other thing we have are legislative staffers and other elements of government that come into play.
Right.
And we often forget that they're part of the game.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I was starting off from a technology perspective. Were you starting off from a technology perspective? It didn't sound like it.
No, I'm a psychologist, as Keith introduced me. So I did not necessarily envision that I would become this well steeped in technology at this point in my career. But you know, it was as the leader in that organization. One of the other interesting facts was that we were supposed to have 26 new positions within the central office to take on this project. We got none of those. So you had to step down and you had to roll up your sleeves and you had to go with it. But I also believe it's a matter of ownership. So I can sit up here and I can say, oh, well, that's, you know, the team's responsible for this. But ultimately, I own the system and I'm responsible for it from a governance at all levels. And so I really believe that it speaks to my leadership if I'm not involved and not on top of everything.
And I think Agile in general just speaks to ownership. There's a lot of ownership and accountability that has to come into play as those teams come together, as you build within an Agile framework. You have to make decisions, you have to have accountability to make those decisions, and people have to accept them as it moves forward.
Yes.
That's a good question. It sounds like a lot of the goal is to flatten the organization, and as doing so, you're trying to spread out the accountability and responsibility. How do you do that in the state? And I know that sounds like a strange question, but where the hierarchy is what gives people a lot of their power. And it sounds like, you know, for a certain period of time, you're taking some of that away, right? How do you get that to happen?
I actually think you broaden and strengthen that power, because otherwise you're really expecting the role to be, it's kind of like the telephone tree. So, you know, John speaks to Mary, Mary speaks to this person. By the time it gets to the next person, it has changed dramatically. If you've got all of those people at the table and we're really investing in that, it's as, you know, really our keynote speaker this morning said, look to your left, look to your right. What have you done to make this project successful? It's not one person. You can't do it that way. I mean, you know, teaming that effort really makes the leaders much stronger, in my estimation.
It really is all about building a team and ensuring that people within that team structure have the authority to do what they need to do. Agile has to be, I mean, it's called Agile. You have to be flexible. You can't stop creative expression or creative or change so you can go and ask your supervisor if that's okay. You know, within the boundaries that you've been given authority over, you need to have the accountability to do what you need to do. That's what makes it Agile.
I think the other thing I would add is that, you know, sometimes it's also about challenging teams. You know, kind of give the project, give the idea to 2 or 3 different teams of people and say, each of you go play and come up with a solution, and then let's evaluate those solutions as a team. I mean, to me, you're getting the best opportunity to really get your best solution.
Got a question here?
Yeah. So one thing I notice in state services that there's a lot of movement when it comes to, if you're on a project, you say like being more agile. But I see a lot of like the different players, they seem to move to different departments. And then the project seems to reset. So if we're saying that we have a structure being agile, being more nimble, there's really no penalties other than your incentive is to promote somewhere else, a different department. So how does that all come into play?
So your questions around people leaving in an Agile environment and then the creativity then leaving with them.
Right. What we're saying is that you can have a buy-in commitment.
Well, you know,
Opportunity comes up. I see just my short time in the state, 5 years.
Yeah.
I see a lot of the players, they move So if they are able to move in 5 years of me being in the state, it just shows me a different perspective. Because like I said, there's not like the penalty from a public sector. You're penalized, your movement is generally forced out if you don't complete a project. Whereas in the state, it seems like you're buying incentives if there's promotional opportunities as opposed to completion of that project.
Well, you know, I think that comes into play as you're building your project structure and your organization and your governance within your project. Those kinds of things you have to take into account that people might leave, and I think that always is a risk when you're managing a project, regardless of whether it's private or public sector. But the creativity and the team building, you know, it becomes an organic thing if you do it correctly, and as it builds, it's a culture, and so as somebody new comes into that culture, it's amazing how, you know, that culture kind of envelops around them, and then they can fit right into the mold. I know what you're saying. There's always a little hiccup, especially if somebody in a key position moves off of a project, even if they don't leave the department. But if your culture on that project is very team-oriented, and I'm thinking back to a period, and I mean, I've run so many projects, I can't remember how many now, but I was working under a director for a project at OSI in my past, and it was an amazing environment. It was that kind of a team culture, creativity, questioning, and people came and left, but as the new people came on board, we just kind of brought them into the culture, showed them how to work within this structure, and then they were just right in there. So it's really a matter of how your leadership defines that project.
We have another question over here.
I'm actually working in local government, which is similar but a little more complicated sometimes. And one of the questions I kind of have to ask is, how do you deal with an environment where creativity is squashed and they're adamantly against Agile methodology? And
you know, I think that the best way I can say is, so I don't come from, I mean, I certainly can recognize when that's happened, but everything I've seen has been that once you kind of crack that door open, people start to see. And so sometimes what you have to do is really start small. And sometimes it's also, if you're not getting there from the IT side of the equation, I think the better path sometimes may be from the business and the demand from that side. But it's, you know, you may not be able to get it as far as you want it to go, but sometimes you've got to really kind of find that crack in the door, that way to start opening it, because there is that, you know, there is that tendency for people to want kind of what they're used to. This is the way we've always done it. This is comfortable. I know my skill sets, and I've seen that in, you know, our transformation process here at DCSS, is that we have staff who are struggling, and we're trying to work with that in terms of a whole change management philosophy and really empower the skills to staff, because it's stuff that they're not comfortable with. They've got to go out on a ledge, and so finding a way to expose them to some of that stuff is, I think, the key to kind of getting those cracks starting to open and widen.
I think the other thing that is worth doing in those situations is trying to understand what may be going on underneath that. So it's very rare that someone will declare that they're actually out to destroy creativity, quash free will, you know, those sorts of things, even though it feels like that. I know exactly what you're talking about. I completely get it. But usually, in my experience with some of the transformations where exactly those sorts of things were happening, those behaviors were happening, they were in reaction to some very real pressures, some very real constraints. It may be fear of keeping your job. It may be that you've got a project that is incredibly, you know, under a lot of pressure. Maybe it's very late. And to have somebody walk in the room and say, hey, we should be more creative, it's just like, oh, please, get out of here, you know. And I must confess, maybe I've been in that position once or twice as a creativity killer. You know, when the pressures are just right, that does happen. And so in those cases, as someone who's trying to be an advocate for that kind of creativity, an advocate for that kind of change, then I have to try and address the underlying issues first And if I can do that, then it's much more likely that they'll listen when I come to them with, the conversation about how we could increase creativity. Yes. I see 2 questions there. I'll start here. Get right back.
Thank you. I'm the Enterprise Project Management Office Manager for DMV, and we're standing up our Agile delivery practice right now. And we did exactly what Sumi said. We put together a matrix team of volunteers who wanted to do it. But we still are very much siloed. We have one of our major lines of businesses, the division refuses to participate, and they're the ones who could use Agile the most. So how did you guys deal with that sort of resistance within your departments?
Well, I was not at DCSS, but at other places. You have to understand, it's an OCM, it's an organizational change really that you have to employ along with Agile as a methodology. You can't do it, just implementing the methodology. And from that perspective, you have to identify who are your partners in the change, who's going to be in the forefront, and then who's going to be, like you said, this business entity that might be lagging behind or a little bit more fearful. And, just come alongside them and do a lot of communication. There's got to be a lot of communication in rolling out Agile. And as they see things changing, you will see that they will start coming more and more to the table. And it may take a long, long time. It may be that you need to be very successful in other implementations with other business entities before they will see the benefit of it. But as success takes hold, I wouldn't be surprised if they'd be coming and knocking on your door.
Another strategy would be really identifying what's in it for them. So, it's like often we think we've got this great process and we're moving forward, and why don't they want? But you got to really try and look behind that, and so part of it is being really investigative and try and find something and sell it to them on why they might be interested and how you might be able to help them. So what are their pain points? And you might be able to find a way through some of that process and find a couple of people within that division that really could start to be emissaries and co-partners with you. Because you're right, sometimes that is very difficult, but usually trying to understand what's their pain points and what's in it for them helps us really put ourselves in that equation and then be able to reach that through.
It is very common, so you'll see it, for instance, I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in a transformation where the operations guys are like, no, we're not doing this Agile stuff, forget it, just not going to happen. So that kind of siloed resistance is very common, whether, just across the spectrum. So I think you're tapping into something that is very normal. The other thing that I recommend is I have a personal strategy that I'll share with you, which I call attend, befriend, and defend. And the idea is first get into one of their status meetings. So you get into the meeting, oh my God, there's Tom. But you don't say anything. You just hang out. Tom's a wallflower. And you're there, and they get used to you being there, and you're there for every status meeting. And sooner or later, you might have a chance to nudge somebody in the elbow and say hi and get to know them, maybe take them out for coffee. So you make friends. You look to build some relationships with these folks, and you do it any way you can. You be an opportunist. And then at some point in this status meeting, something bad's going to happen. There's going to be a crisis. It'll happen. We're in technology. It happens every day. And when that crisis comes along, if you're there to step forward and say, I can help, all of a sudden, you're the most valuable guy in the room. Okay, so you've gone from a potentially hostile outsider to somebody who can help them succeed. And that relationship building is a wonderful way of crossing silos and building the kinds of relationships necessary to get them engaged. I see a question back here, but I've got one right here. We'll start there.
I work at EDD. We're using Agile in some of our projects, but what I've found is that the IT staff, or particularly developers, want to keep things siloed among themselves. They want to use iterative, but they don't want to include, say, the testing group, who will get it later. We have the integration testing initially, and then it goes to the system testing. The customer doesn't want to commit to go to like daily meetings. So everybody's kind of doing their own little thing, even though they want to do the iterative, and they're having trouble keeping track of everything. They don't necessarily go to Scrum Master training. What's your suggestion for moving it along?
I hear a little commonality here. This is good. Any ideas, guys?
Well, I can tell you that we're facing some of that as well. So both Sumi and I are kind of double teaming it at times, kind of coming from different angles on that issue, but really trying to, in essence, force the structural arrangement so that you can't leave any of those partners from the table. So I make sure that I have weekly meetings, for instance, with infrastructure and with then applications and development, but then we also have bi-weekly meetings with the entire team around moving that forward and making sure that in terms of, tracking and dashboard kinds of developments, that all of those components are in there. So nothing, it has to be a team effort to move it forward. And so putting some of those things in place really start to force people to have those conversations. But yeah, we've experienced some of that same problem in terms of, well, I don't really want to go to testing. No, so our new process for any kind of change management requires that every aspect of that change management plan has to be addressed before it'll get signed off by the governance board. So you will have testing, training, post-implementation issues, policy issues, legislative issues, all of those things have to be signed off in terms of impact, commitment, agreement, all of that, and moves forward. And then, those connected dots have to continue to focus through the rest of the implementation of that process, that change.
Another idea that came up that's in a similar domain, certainly as a transformation agent or coach, if you have the opportunity to really get some sort of stakeholder to make the decision to move people around and just kind of force the issue, great, take it, right? But sometimes you don't have that mandate, and when you don't, the other thing you can do is if you have different groups, if you're in a larger organization, I've been lucky enough to be in a place where those other guys are doing Agile really well, or they're doing, they've got cross-functional teams that are really performing well. And so then I have an example, and examples are really powerful too. So I can take people and show them and introduce them to another group that's actually doing that, and that can be really, really compelling. When people can see it working with somebody else, that can be a gentle way of getting them on board.
And that's great. We actually are in the process of building cross-functional teams. I had that experience when I was on the East Coast, and we are building that. We've just recreated a whole new category of folks that are bridging between business and systems issues, and it's a great change agent kind of process that is really helping to move the whole organization along.
So I had a question back here, and then I'll come back here. Was there someone who had a question back here? Okay, I'll start here.
So I'm wrapping up a Agile project that I've been on for a year, and we're kind of getting the word out at the grassroots level, and it's really slow, but I think people are accepting of the change. But I was wondering if your department had some sort of, I guess, office, PMO, or some centralized area that's an advocate for Agile, and how do you get the word out?
We do. I created a EPMO, an Enterprise Project Management Office, and they're responsible for, and part of that came out of actually our 5-year strategic plan. So we started with our 5-year strategic plan and then started creating a series of annual tactics for each and every division, which included a lot of crossover between business and IT. And so they started by building that out, and now have been building all of the projects and the Agile components out of that.
Go ahead, Sumi. Were you going to?
Did you have a follow-up question to that?
Part of the obstacles that I see with our outreach is getting executive buy-in and kind of getting them to drink the Kool-Aid. And so it's been difficult to get them to be proponents of this new change. How do you change their mindset? And do you have any tips and tricks to kind of, get the bug in their ear?
I don't think it's much different than the other situations that we've talked about. There needs to be a lot of communication and repeated. You can't just give them one presentation on Agile and have them be convinced. You've got to come back to the table again and again, maybe different ways. Maybe bring, we brought in an organization to do kind of an Agile demonstration with Legos. Give them the experience. What does it mean? And really talk about what does it mean for them? How would they play a part? What's the benefit? It's really a lot of communication and talking.
Yeah, that whole Legos example, I required all of our exec teams, 17 people, to kind of go through it. And the majority of those folks are on the business side of the house, because what I do see is sometimes is that, as much as business likes to complain that IT doesn't hear them and doesn't do what they want them to do, getting them to assume a greater role in requirements development and understanding the real business and digging through, they were having trouble moving in that direction. They were having trouble meeting kind of a teaming effort. So we did do that Legos exercise, which was really very eye-opening, but there are still pockets of resistance that we're seeing and dealing with. And so some of the other things we're trying to engage is a lot of transparency in the organization, but also developing the whole leadership and looking for other avenues to really build people's capacity to accept change and to move on.
Early on, I don't think we were very good at talking to executives and talking to that executive level of the business when we were first, introducing Agile. But we've gotten better at it. And one of the problems, and you've probably encountered this, is I've actually gone into executives and talked to them about user stories and how great user stories were going to be for them and all the wonderful things they were going to do. And of course, you get that big question mark over their head. What is this clown talking about? What's a user story, right? So it was a language problem, and part of the problem there was learning to speak in the business language, in the customer language, which is initiatives, which is money, which is dollars and cents, which is features. They don't want to hear about user stories, and so I had to learn to change the way I was talking so that they could hear me. And so I wasn't that, hippy-dippy Agile guy in the room. So that was part of the game as well. Okay.
I don't want to bogart all the time, but I don't think people realize the amount of time they need to dedicate to the Agile process and the amount of time they need to spend together as a team. And I feel that management doesn't allow for that extra 25, 30% of their duties is assigned to be dedicated to that. They think it's maybe like 5 to 10% of the time, and that it's some magic pill that's going to fix everything if they just let it go. I don't know if they're willing to let those resources have that ability to engage with the team as they should. Did you have to go ahead and push your team in that direction, push your employees in that direction to be there, be available, make sure that they were present to support these guys in their efforts?
Well, I'm kind of lucky because I've got a strong sponsor. But I think that's true, that you do have to get people to understand that the value that they're going to get by putting in the extra time, and really it's moving the requirements development and the issues that may come out of that you would normally in a waterfall situation find in testing or find in UAT. You're going to find it earlier in the process. So you're really reducing the risk risk. So it's really that kind of an explanation and showing people that, spending the time up front is not a bad thing, because I'm not going to be spending, maybe 3 or 6 months fixing defects that aren't going to occur because I took the time up front to have these discussions and communication and really understand what the business needs. So I think it's that kind of an approach.
Some of the things we did were, so you can't just jump from A to B. And so trying to find some smaller pilot projects and opportunities to move things forward really was, I think, instrumental at the same time of while we were exposing people to new methodologies and new ways of thinking, and kind of trying to have that open conversation and move in that direction. And then we had smaller teams who actually took on a project, and it not only was really successful internally in terms of showing people that they could actually create and develop from beginning to end and roll out within 9 months an online application process that, was very instrumental in also getting them a lot of accolades from the county users who thought that they were fabulous for what they did. But it also made them kind of hungry to get that kind of experience ongoing. And so what we've seen is we've got more folks who, want to get involved and get engaged and move on in this direction. And so, yeah, you do have to allow for that. But I think as people can gain that comfort level, the issue of how much more investment or time, it's just shifting it from different places. I mean, it may have taken, how many months and years do we spend, we have this thing called red folders in the department. It's like, they have to go through like 20 different steps, and it must take 30 weeks some days. Where's the red folder is the biggest laugh we get. Like, who's got it? Oh, it's in your office. No, it's in your office. Who knows? I'd like to solve that problem, quite frankly, but that in and of itself took a whole lot of time, energy, and effort. And then if there's somewhere in the middle of that, there is somebody who says, well, I don't really get this, or I don't agree, it all goes back through the whole process again. So is that more time-consuming and more difficult than it is the other way around? I think you have to look at those things.